Okay. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. So inshallah now we're going to continue in our reading of Shaykh al-Majjājī's al-Muhadhdhab min al-Fiqh al-Maliki wa adillatuhu. Again, just a reminder, this is a book that Shaykh al-Majjājī, hafidhahullah, that he wrote as a way to try to make it easy for people to enter into the study of fiqh, particularly according to the school of Medina, or the Maliki school as it is also known as, because many of the traditional texts are almost inaccessible for the average person. And so he's written this text where it has a very short metin, or a very short text part, and then the commentary on it is also very, very short. Now, he is taking the sources from those traditional texts, but they're greatly truncated, and that is the meaning of what al-Muhadhdhab, right? It is that which has been pruned, what? Min al-Fiqh al-Maliki, from Mālikī Fiqh. So if you take the body of the study of fiqh from the school of Medina, and you prune it back, هذا هو al-Muhadhdhab. That is the meaning of that which has been pruned or trimmed. Wa alaykum salam, Ishaq. So, anyway, we are still fi kitab al-Zakāh. We're still in the chapter on Zakāh. This is a very large chapter. And again, even in this book, which is a major, right, a major abridgment, the book of Zakāh is always one of the biggest chapters in any systematic study of fiqh, because it's complicated of all the different things that Zakāh is applicable to and how it's determined. So now we are fi what? Fasl fi masarif al-Zakāh. Now, who are the masarif, right? Who are the recipients who can receive Zakāh? تصرف إلى موجود من الأصناف الثمانية المذكورين في كتاب الله. So it is to be given to those, Zakāh is to be given to those who are included in the asnaf al-thamaniya, right? The 8 categories that are mentioned in the Quran, that are mentioned in the Book of Allah. فالأول والثاني, the first and the second, are al-fuqara'u wal-masakinu. And so the first is what? The people who are faqir and the people who are miskin. والثالث, right, the third category was with amiluna alayha, those that are appointed to collect the zakah. الموكلون بتحصيلها من الأموال التي وجبت فيها وتوزيعها على مستحقيها. And so the third category is what? Those that have been appointed to collect the zakah, who are then entrusted with collecting it from the wealth of which people have to give it, and then also including in their responsibility is then the correct distributing to who is the rightful recipient. So the important thing about the third category, al-amiluna alayha, these, the amil alayha, the person that is in charge of collecting zakah, has to know the ahkam of zakah. Because you are not only entrusted, you have to know who to collect it from. Therefore, you know who should owe zakah or who ought to owe. And then most importantly, even if you, okay, that person gave me their zakah, you've been entrusted with it. Now, if you're going to be involved in the distribution of it, well, you have to know who it goes to, so you also have to know, right, the ahkam of zakah. And so Shaykh al-Majjājī mentions the verse, إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ. So it's important to understand that in the Quran, depending on the context, that when Allah Ta'ala mentions zakah in the Quran, sometimes it's what bima'na at-tathhir. Sometimes it's meant to, like, purify yourself, like taharat al-jasam, like to purify your body. وبعض الأحيان it's tathhir or tazkiyat al-nafs, right, to purify one's soul. And then بعض الأحيان الصدقة. Sometimes Allah Ta'ala will mention sadaqah بمعنى الزكاة. وبعض الأحيان الصدقة بمعنى الصدقة. And so then other times, right, Allah will mention sadaqah, and it means sadaqah, meaning what? It is min al-nawafil. It's nafila. It's an optional, praiseworthy but optional. And then at times it means no, the sadaqah or farida, right, the one that is fard, that is mandatory. So in this case, in the 60th verse of Surah Tawbah, in the 9th chapter, in the 60th verse, إِنَّمَا صَدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينِ. This is talking about zakah. Right, this is what is meant by it. Now, it continues by saying, وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا. That's where we just talked about, right? And those that have been entrusted to administer that. وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ فِي الرِّقَابِ. And for those whose hearts are attracted to the faith of Islam, and by giving that as a gift to them and as a gesture of goodwill. But that also has to be, you just don't give it to people in the hopes that they will become the people that have ta'lif. Right? You don't give it to the mu'allif in the hopes, or rather, you don't give it to a person in the hopes that he will become mu'allif. No, the person already has to display that they have this ta'lif, that they have this mu'allafa, that they already have this affinity for Islam. Then that can be given to them as an incentive to help, hopefully, encourage them to accept Islam entirely. And also, wafir riqab, for setting free, right, the people who are in bondage, وَالْغَارِمِينَ وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. For those who are in debt, right, for those who are in debt. So zakah, it can be given for people that have debts. And then of course, وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, يعني في جهاد أو في أنواع سبيله عز وجل. And so giving money in the way of Allah can include, obviously the biggest thing that comes to mind is like jihad and other things. وابن السبيل, and for needy travelers. فريضة من الله, and this is an obligation from Allah. So this is why we can understand إنما الصدقات فريضة من الله. Right, so a way to help read, because I think sometimes we read the Arabic and we get so caught up in going word by word by word by word by word that we lose track of the flow of the meaning. So all of the things, right? إنما صدقات للفقراء, and on and on and on, right? That sadaqah is for the poor and so on and so on, but it is what faridatan min Allah. It's a kind of sadaqah that is what farida, and therefore if it's mandatory, يعني الزكاة. We're talking about zakah. Wallahu alimun hakim, and Allah is all knowing, and He is the ruler. So again, now going, it says الرابع, the fourth category of person, الذين يتألف الإمام بها قلوبهم على الإسلام. And so notice here that al-Majjājī, in his explanation of the fourth category about those that they're already displaying an affinity or have an affinity of Islam in their heart, he says الذين يتألف الإمام بها. It has to be a person of knowledge that recognizes that these people have this quality. It's not a bribe, right? It's not a bribe. It's a gesture of goodwill to welcome you into the club. to welcome you into the group, to welcome you into the Muslims. It's not a bribe. And so in order to have that kind of basira, that the discernment, that's why he says, يَتَأَلَّفْ الْإِمَامُ بِهَا قُلُوبَهُمْ عَلَى الْإِسْلَامِ. So it should be a person that has the requisite knowledge to be able to make that kind of discernment and decision. Al-Khamis, the fifth category. وفي في عتق الرقاب والمملوكة من المسلمين. As it relates to freeing somebody in bondage, it's for those that are in some type of, it's a form of emancipation. What? Min al-Muslimin. So in general, right? In general, az-zakah is for the Muslims only. The only exception is the fourth one we mentioned, but it has to be people that have displayed an affinity for Islam. You don't give it to them لَعَلَّهُمْ يُسْلِمُونَ. You don't say, okay, well, I gave them this zakah money in the hopes that they will become Muslim, but they have not displayed. وَلَكِنْ مَا ظَهَرَ أَيْ عَلَامَاتٍ لِمُؤَلَّفَةِ الْإِسْلَامِ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ. They haven't displayed, any affinity for Islam in their hearts, but I just give it to them anyway in hopes that, well, maybe that would be like giving them a bribe. So the general meaning, the rule is that zakah is only for the Muslims, and the only exception is those that are on the cusp of becoming Muslim. So even though it deals with what? The itq al-riqab, setting free people that are in bondage, right? Wal-mamluka, what is what? Min al-Muslimin. They have to be from amongst the Muslims. What's the sixth category? Al-gharimuna lid-deen. Al-gharimuna lid-dain. Those who are unable to repay their debts, min al-Muslimin, from amongst the Muslims. What? Lidainin lazimahu wa ajazu an qada'ihi. Right? Those that are unable to repay it, and they are they're ajiz. They're people that can't get out from underneath the obligation of debt, and therefore you can give that kind of assistance. Was-sabi', right? The seventh one is what? Fi sabilillahi wa huwa al-ghazwu wal-jihad, right? It's in fighting. وَالثَّامِن إِبْرُ السَّبِيلِ, the wayfarer or the weary traveler or the needy traveler. وَهُوَ الْغَرِيبُ الْمُنْقَطِعُ عَنْ مَالِهِ, right? It is the one who is traveling and they're somehow cut off from their wealth. So let's say you have somebody that is traveling and they lost their wallet, and they're in a tight jam. They lost their wallet. They don't have access to their money. This could be a potential scenario for that. وَيُعْتَى الْفَقِيرُ وَالْمَسَاكِينُ كِفَايَتَهُمَا وَكِفَايَةَ عِيَالِهِمَا لِسَنَةٍ. So the poor and the needy, right? Al-faqir, yani al-fuqara, as Allah mentions in the Quran, right? But the singular al-fuqara, al-faqir, right? So the faqir and the miskin, which is the singular of al-masakin, right? That they are given what? Kifayatahuma wa kifayata ayalihima li sanatin wahida. They are given what will suffice them and anybody that they might be responsible for, like maybe their wives or their children or elderly parents or something, for a year. Even if, right, walau zada ala nisab, even if it exceeds the nisab, right? وَيُعْتَى الْعَامِلْ عَلَيْهَا, and then the one that has been appointed to collect and distribute the zakah, ajra mithlihi, is given a wage equivalent to his service. So people that collect zakah, I've heard people sometimes scoff at organizations that collect zakah and get paid as if this is something blameworthy. The Quran is actually saying no, like the person can have some, it should be reflective of what they're doing, but there's nothing blameworthy about that. وَالْمُؤَلَّفْ قَلْبُهُ عَلَى الْإِسْلَامِ مَا يَرَاهُ الْإِمَامِ مُكَافِئًا لِتَأْلِيفِهِ. And then for those whose hearts are to be reconciled with Islam or to finally make that final commitment, are given what the Imam deems appropriate to achieve that. Which means it could be a little or it could be a lot. وَالْغَازِي مَا يَقُومُ بِهِ فِي حَالِ الْغَزْوِ. And so the soldier or the warrior is given what he needs for the time of battle, right? Not just all the time, but what is needed to achieve that. وَإِبْنُ السَّبِيلِ, as it relates again to the weary traveler, right? قَدْرَ مَا يُبَلِّغُهُ إِلَى مَقْصِدِهِ. And so is given an amount that helps him reach his destination, أو إلى موضع ماله, or where he can get back to his wealth. So again, somebody's traveling, they lost their wallet or their wallet was stolen, and they need some financial help, either to, let's say they were coming to visit family and they need some extra help for the last leg of the journey, or they were going home where they will get access to their wealth, but they need some help. This is a legitimate category for that. As well, he says, لا يشترط استيعاب الموجود من الأصناف الثمانية بالعطاء. It is not a condition to distribute the zakat to all of the 8 categories present, meaning like all, the only time you would give zakat is if all of these 8 categories are fulfilled. He said, بل يجوز صرفها كلها لصنف واحد. It is permissible to allocate it to all, allocate all of the zakat that's been collected to one or even واحد أو صنفين, to 1 or 2 categories. So you could say like, oh, we had a faqir and we had a ibn al-sabil, or we had a faqir and we had at-riqab, or so you could give it. It doesn't always have to be equally distributed throughout all 8 categories. ولا يجوز صرفها لغير المسلمين. And this is important. This is a qaida. This is a principle in Islam. It is not permissible to give it to non-Muslims. Right? That's the qaida. That's the rule. We said the only near exception is that because that person has mu'allafa lil Islam fi qalbihi, because that person clearly has an affinity for Islam, and the imam or a person of knowledge or knows that they're very close, and that, right, that's given. But as a general, no, zakah is only given to the Muslims. Sadaqah, like in my case or like Dawood's case, we have non-Muslim family. I can give sadaqah to my family. There's no restrictions on that. But zakah has to go to the Muslims. The only exception would be if I felt that somehow, I had a family member that really, really loved Islam and they're right on the fence, and that somehow a gift of money would somehow persuade them of that. But again, that has to be something that's clear and evident. وحيث عدم الساعي العدل, right? And so when you don't have somebody, no, تفضل. شو؟ Okay. على ال ما في سؤال. Okay. So he says, وحيث عدم الساعي العدل. So what happens when you don't have somebody that's reliable or trustworthy, right, to collect the zakah? He said, فالأفضل أن يوكل المزكي غيره على تفريقها. It is better than for one giving the zakat to appoint someone else to distribute it. So perhaps you have somebody that is reliable that can collect the zakah, but they don't know enough about the ahkam of zakah to distribute it. Then this is acceptable that you can separate that task of collection and distribution. Let's say, for instance, there's a knowledgeable person in the community, but maybe due to disability or to age, they can't go out and collect it. So then you split it between somebody who is salih, they're a trustworthy person, but they lack the knowledge to be able to know who it should go to. It's acceptable for them to collect the zakah, but then you entrust the decision making of the distribution of it to the person of knowledge. So he says, فالأفضل أن يوكل المزكي غيره على تفريقها إذا كان عارفا, right? And if that person is knowledgeable, ليسلم من المحمدة, right? In order to avoid seeking praise as well, right? So this is an important aspect of the collection and the distribution, like tajmi' wa nashr amwal lil-zakah, is that you want to avoid riya. You want to avoid being seen as, a pious person, or avoid being seen or wanting to be known to, or like, you're the person with the connection, like, hey, I can hook you up. Like, obviously, you want to avoid these kinds of things. He says, وَأَنْ يُقَدِّرَ الْأَحْوَجَ فَالْأَحْوَجِ. And so, therefore, you also want to make sure that in the distribution of it, it doesn't become like nepotism, but rather you distribute it to the greatest need. If the greatest need is, for instance, like you could think about like what's going on in Palestine. Like if you're literally fighting a life and death, situation of being killed, starved, and so on, then there is a greater need for zakah versus people on the cusp of maybe, wanting to accept Islam, that have affinity for Islam. But if people are literally being murdered and blown up and starved to death, they will take a greater priority. And so this is why he's saying that you have to have somebody, man kana arifan li ahkam al-zakah. You have to have somebody that is knowledgeable about the different rules of zakah. Okay. Continuing, he says, وَبِالنِّسْبَةِ إِلَى اللَّفْظِ وَلَا يَجُوزُ صَرْفُهَا لِغَيْرِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. Now he's going to give some commentary about the statement, it is not permissible to give zakah, not sadaqah, but zakah to non-Muslims, إِلَّا فِي مُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبِهِمْ, as we've already stated, except for that one exception for those that it would somehow aid those whose hearts clearly display an affinity for Islam, على ما بينا, and that he said we've already explained this. He says وكذلك نشترط أن لا يكون المعطى له من ذوي القرابة الواجبة نفقتهم. And so likewise, it is also a condition that in that case, it should not be amongst those relatives that the nafaqah or the maintenance is an obligation. So in the same example, I have elderly parents and I'm taking care of my parents. And maybe they have gotten to a point where they seem to have an affinity for Islam. And they have it, it's clearly displayed in them that in their hearts they have an affinity for Islam. It is not acceptable for me to take my zakah, not my sadaqah, but my zakah, which is a haqq, right? It's a right that already belongs to those masarif al-zakah, those that have the right to it. I cannot give that to my parents because I already owe nafaqah to them. I already owe maintenance to them. The difference would be that, let's say, Dawood, his somebody in his family that he is responsible for, and they show clear affinity to Islam, theoretically, I could say, well, maybe this would help if there's really a need. But it would be different because I don't owe his family nafaqah, where he does, right? So that's kind of, he's saying that's the important difference, so that we avoid a system of nepotism. Right? We avoid a system of nepotism. وأن لا يكونوا من آل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لحديث al-Muttalib ibn Rabi'a ibn al-Harith. And so the recipient of zakah should also not be somebody from the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As used for proof of that is the hadith of al-Muttalib ibn Rabi' ibn al-Harith, in which he said that the Prophet ﷺ said, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الصدقة لا تنبغي لآل محمد, right? That the zakah should not be given to somebody of the family of Muhammad. إنما هي أوساخ الناس. Rather, it is merely the impurities of the people. Because if you think about it, zakah is a purification. So just like when you purify your body, if you're using water or like a garment, let's say you need to purify your garment. In the purification process, the byproduct of that will include the mazil and the muzal. Like you'll have the water used to make that purification, and then as a result of which it will also have some of the contaminants in it as well. And so the Prophet ﷺ was saying, like, I don't want the zakah for my family, because another way of looking at it is they are purifying their wealth, and therefore in some kind of way it's like they're impurities. Doesn't mean that, zakah is something, nasty, but the Prophet ﷺ is saying, look, my family is different. And so he said, what إِنَّمَا هِيَ أَوْسَاخُ النَّاسِ, and that أخرجه Muslim. You can find this collected in Sahih Muslim. Lastly, he says, وَآلُهُ عَلَيْهِ الصَّلَاةُ وَالسَّلَامُ Banu Hashim. And so who is the family of the Prophet ﷺ? They are the Banu Hashim, the tribe of Banu Hashim. وذريتهم المتناسلون إلى الآن. And they are the people from Banu Hashim and their progeny, meaning their descendants, up until the present time. He says, وأجاز المتأخرون من العلماء. Now, latter-day scholars have permitted a zakah for the descendants, إعطاءهم من الزكاة لانقطاع حقهم الذي كانوا يعطونه من خمس الفاء من بيت المال. And so he said some of the latter-day scholars, they permitted giving zakah due to what they saw as a cessation of that right or that obligation, and also meaning which is used to be given from the 1/5 of the spoils al-fight, like when you have a battle, from the public treasury. And this is wallahu a'lam. Right? And this is some debate, clearly going against the opinion of the earlier scholars. So this covers the basics of the masarif al-zakah, or the recipients of whose zakah is to be given to. Just to repeat as an important takeaway, because people ask every year, can I give zakah to a family member? Zakah should be given to the Muslims, to the fuqara, to al-masakin, to all of those groups. Now, it's possible that your family is one of them, but it cannot be a family member of which you have the obligation of nafaqah. Right, that you have the obligation of maintenance over them, right? But you can always give your family sadaqah. That's always an option, right? So remember that zakah, it probably helps to envision it this way. If you meet the nisab, right, if you meet the minimum of which any amount over that has to be taken off, right, 2.5%, and so on, right, unless you have, livestock, right, and we already went over how that works. But anything over that nisab, it isn't yours, right? It's not yours to give to just anybody that you want. And that money already belongs to somebody. And that's why Allah Ta'ala talks about إِلَّا الْمُصَلِّينَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ حَقٌّ مَعْلُومٌ لِلسَّائِلِ وَالْمَحْرُومِ. Like in Surah Al-Ma'arij, Allah talks about the people of the musalli, the righteous person that prays, right? A person of devout, a person of devotion to Allah. Because here, al-musallin doesn't only mean people that pray. Obviously, they pray, but it also is meant to confer that they're muta'abbid, right? They're somebody that is a devout worshiper of Allah. And along with that comes a kind of consciousness that whatever wealth that I earn has to be calculated and determined, and whatever, that it already belongs. It's not mine to hold on to or keep or to hoard. I have to give it, but I also have to give it to these 8 categories. So it helps to think that zakah is a special obligatory kind of charity. It is not your money, and there is somebody out there right now potentially that is in need of that, and they have a right and an obligation. They have a right to it, and you have an obligation to give it to them. So that sometimes helps. But yes, you can always give sadaqah to your family, Muslim or non-Muslim, right? Sadaqah is sadaqah. And as we know, Allah Ta'ala talks about the silat al-raham, right? The maintaining of the bond of the womb and the ties of kinship. So sadaqah can always be given to your family, Muslim, even if they're non-Muslim. But zakah, inshallah, is something different. Any questions about any of those categories or descriptions?
Can it be used for things that's not necessarily for Muslim, but that'll benefit Muslim, like a school, hospital?
Yeah, so the question is, can zakah be given to things that will benefit the Muslims, like a school or a hospital or the like? And the question, the question to the question, right? The answer to the question is yes. And what I mean by that, before everybody run off and give to you, it has conditions as well. Again, this is a primer text to its basic, but in the meaning of what Allah Ta'ala says, what? وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Though what is implied about fi sabilillah can have a primary meaning of what, as you said, al-ghazwa wal-jihad, like if you're having to fight. But let's say you live in a place where there is no ghazwa, there is no jihad going on, and there's a need fi sabilillah to educate the Muslims, or a need fi sabilillah to strengthen the Muslims, right? Like a hospital to make them, then yes, in these circumstances, they can be. But as we also said, there is an important cascading order of priorities. That's why zakah, the third thing that Allah mentions, the third category that Allah mentions is what? Al-amilina alayha. We also need to have people that collect and distribute, that know the rules, so that they not only know who it goes to, but they know the priorities of who it goes to. So that is something that, again, and Allah Ta'ala says, what? وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا. That should ideally be like a collective body of scholars or trustworthy people that can collect and then know where it goes to. So that hopefully we could maybe by consensus be able to determine where the greatest needs are. And then later on, as we will study, as we, continue our study of fiqh, we will also understand that there are different ways of understanding of when he said that in the statement, he said, وَأَنْ يُقَدِّرَ الْأَحْوَجَ فَالْأَحْوَجِ, right, to prioritizing, which need is the greater need, part of that determination is also location, right? Not as an absolute, but it is also an important consideration that where the zakat is collected from and then giving it to the people in the location first. Again, exceptions can be made. If you have, again, like Palestine, you have a situation where there's a potential of an entire population of Muslims to be wiped out. That you could say, in this current set of circumstances, we are going to send our money there because the need is so great that you may actually have a situation where the Muslims will be entirely removed. So this is what we can understand. أن يقدر الأحوج فالأحوج. So that's an important consideration as well. Any other questions? So we still have a little ways to go, maybe another 2-3 weeks, inshallah. Hopefully we can finish our chapter on zakah. And then after we kind of get through this, I'll circle back around and go through quite a bit more of the commentary. I actually mainly put in his comment, or rather he put in the part of the text and left out a lot of his commentary because it's a lot to digest. Or if you like, I'm happy to actually just kind of take the commentary and translate it and make it available on the website or as a supplementary video that you can reference on your own time, inshallah, whichever you prefer. And then hopefully after that, we'll move on to the next bab, inshallah, the next kitab. وجزاكم الله خيرا وصلوات الله تعالى على النبي المتوكل الأمين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. وإياكم.